Hello everyone and welcome back to Voices Towards 2050. This season we're taking a deeper dive into discussing different perspectives, experiences and solutions from people across the country, exploring the key question, what will it take to end domestic family and sexual violence in a generation? Conversations like these inform the strategic advice we provide to governments to help strengthen policy, practice and the coordinated efforts needed to drive real change. We're pleased to return in 2026 with an important first episode featuring a guest the Commission works closely with. I hope you enjoy this year's episodes of Voices Towards 2050.
People always say to you, or people did say to me, I didn't think someone like you, Ged, would have put up with that. And I think that's another attitude that comes through strongly, that whole why didn't you just leave, or why did you put up with it, or why didn't you tell him to bugger off. It's just so different when you're in the situation, and it can happen to anyone, of course, we all know.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter about your postcode or your education level, anything.
Welcome to Voices Towards 2050, the official podcast series of the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commission. Please be aware that this podcast discusses topics related to domestic, family and sexual violence, which may be distressing for some listeners. Support is available. If you need assistance, please contact 1-800-RESPECT or reach out to your local support services. Thank you for joining us.
So I'm very pleased to welcome to today's episode of the podcast the Hon Ged Kearney, Assistant Minister for Social Services and Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence. Welcome, Ged.
Thank you very much for having me, Micaela.
So I want to begin by acknowledging that I am making this recording today from the lands of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I always feel very grounded when I am here at home, and I feel very honoured to live on these lands. I want to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders and people on these lands and across Australia. And my commitment is to work as an ally in this role and always. So Geraldine Mary Ged Kearney, I'm going to embarrass you and do a brief introduction before we get started on the podcast. I don't think many people listening will need an introduction, but I'm just going to share a little bit of your bio, if that's okay.
Sure.
Geraldine Mary Ged Kearney was
Nobody calls me Geraldine Mary.
Do you know, it was very funny. When I saw that your name was Geraldine, I've only ever met one other Geraldine, and it made me smile. And whenever anyone says my full name like that, I feel like I'm about to get into trouble.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So you grew up in Richmond,
yes,
raised in a large working class family, second youngest of 9.
Yes, that's right.
That says something. That's a whole nother conversation about what you learn about being part of such a big tribe.
Indeed.
Yeah. So you initially studied economics at Monash before pivoting to training as a registered nurse, qualifying in 1985 and later completed a Bachelor of Education. So you've enjoyed study, it sounds like.
You've gone very deep into my background.
Well, I think it's really, that's an interesting mix of things, economics, nursing, which you talk about, and education, all of that which you bring to this role and the other work that you've done. So what many people will know you from is that you've been an elected member of the Australian House of Representatives since March 2018.
Yes.
Originally representing what was the division of Batman before the seat was renamed to Cooper. Your maiden speech, so we have gone deep, was advocating for humane refugee policy in Australia and called for an end to offshore detention of asylum seekers. I don't know, you and I haven't talked about this. I was part of, when I was at MacKillop Family Services, we were part of implementing when it did move to bringing onshore asylum seekers. So we've had a shared passion for that. Yeah. You've been re-elected, so 3 further times, 2019, 2022, and most recently last year, 2025. And across every role, Jed, it's very clear that you've had a strong and consistent focus on advocating for women and vulnerable communities, which has been demonstrated across all of the roles leading up to that. As President of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, as a founding member of the Climate and Health Alliance, advocate for recognising climate change as a public health issue, and now in your role as Assistant Minister for Prevention of Family Violence. What prompted us to have this conversation today, Jed, was that your recent article, you recently published and shared your personal experiences of coercive control. And I want to start by both thanking you for doing that. I think for anybody that shares their story, and the one consistent theme from everybody who's both shared their story with me individually across a much broader platform such as you have, is always doing that to try and ensure that other people don't have to experience what they have, to make the world a better place, basically.
I did want to share it, but I have to say, Micaela, that I sat on it for a long time and for all sorts of reasons. I was worried about, is this about me? This is not about me, but I was really quite worried about the response of the perpetrator. And I was actually very nervous after the article was published as well. I had a little bit of PTSD because I thought around every corner he would turn up and there would be consequences for me telling that story. And I was anxious and nervous. I can even feel the anxiety in me now as I'm telling you this. But what was amazingly empowering and wonderful and was the response. So many women reached out to me after that and said, oh my God, that is exactly what happened to me, or that is my life right now. You are describing my life. There were, the response was overwhelming really from women who were telling me, thank you, Jed, for saying that out loud. Because, I want to say my story out loud too, because so many women hold it in and hold it back, and it's something that isn't spoken about, particularly the whole issue of coercive control, because so many people would say, well, he doesn't hit you, does he? He's not a violent man. And at first I accepted that. I thought, oh, yeah, well, maybe I'm lucky. But then as time went on in that relationship, I realised, no, this is not healthy for me. This is not right. This relationship is very toxic. And a lot of women said they recognised in my story, they recognised what was happening in their relationship, and they knew then, having read my story and many other women who've shared that, yes, this is why I'm feeling that there's something wrong here and it's not just me and I'm not lucky, in fact. So, yeah, it was quite an interesting experience telling that story.
Yeah, it sounds like a real journey, Jed, both in reaching, I can resonate, and I know a lot of other people can, that issue about this is not about me, when is it the right time to share your story, and then the very real reaction to what it does in terms of bringing back, and I think bringing back what the feelings were and what your point about having a bit of PTSD afterwards. There's no such thing as a bit of PTSD. No. It really has a big impact on you.
It does. And, that whole sense of, when you're in a coercive control relationship, the consequences, and when you do something and that there will be consequences, but you do it anyway. It might be something as small as visiting my mother or inviting my sisters over for lunch or, doing something that I knew broke outside the boundaries, or spending money that wasn't agreed to me spending that money on. And there's many, many other examples. There are just some that come to mind now. I would know that there would be consequences, and that was always that dreadful feeling that you had to face that afterwards when you got home. And it was, I had a little bit of that, that feeling after knowing the story was out there. So, it was really quite a hard time afterwards, not diminishing the experiences of other women out there right now who are going through that. I just want them to know that I understand what they're feeling.
And I think it's incredibly powerful for someone in a leadership role like you, have to both share what your experiences have been, but what it's like to talk about it now. Because understanding that that's what we're asking of people when we ask them to keep telling their story, whether it's privately or publicly to inform policy and service design, that it has a cost. There's a cost to choosing to share the story.
There really is. And I think, we recognise that. And, thanks to your advocacy and a lot of people out there that, it's those stories that really do influence policy. A woman should only have to tell her story once. And I think hopefully people are seeing that is coming through in some of our policy responses now. It is traumatic. I'm feeling a little bit traumatised right now telling it again. I don't know why. But so we do understand that, Micaela. And I know you've always been so incredibly strong in making sure that victim survivors' voices are heard in our policy development. And here's a prime example of why that is real and true.
It is. It is. And you always listen in such a genuine way. And I think the other lesson in that is for all of us is not to assume that we know what people are bringing into any conversation with them and to be respectful of that. And that you have brought that knowledge and experience to all of the work that you've done and clearly to the passion that you bring for this role.
It's funny. People always say to you, or people did say to me, I didn't think someone like you, Ged, would have put up with that. And I think that's another attitude that comes through strongly where why didn't you just leave, or why did you put up with it, or why didn't you tell him to bugger off? It's just so different when you're in the situation, and it can happen to anyone, of course, we all know.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter about your postcode or your education level, anything. And it's kind of insidious. You find yourself over time making excuses. This is normal, my fault. And it just creeps up on you. And it gets though for me, I don't know for other people, but for me, it got to a point where I did realise through a lot of interventions from, when things got worse and the coercion got worse and I was more and more under his control, where my family actually said to me, what the hell, Ged, And I was lucky. I had a great deal of family support and love, and the village came around me and I was able to leave. Although I must say the one and only time there was any violence was when I left. And that's quite interesting because you do hear that is, the statistics show that one of the most dangerous times for a woman is when she announces or she tries to leave. So I understand that as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being prepared to make yourself. It makes you vulnerable, sharing like that in a whole lot of ways, and as you say, even now talking about it. So I really want to acknowledge that, and thank you for doing that. One of the things that I was really interested reading the article was that, and I know we've talked about this a lot in terms of your portfolio and your responsibility around promoting healthy masculinities. And one of the things you talk about in the article is pretty quickly turning to men and boys as a priority area for action and what we need to be thinking and doing in that space. Because on the one hand, you're very clear and firm about it wasn't your responsibility. It isn't any woman's responsibility when they're experiencing that violence. But we also need to be thinking about how do we work differently with men and boys. What have you been thinking about that since you've started in this role?
So much.
Yes.
So much. This is an enormous part of solving the problem is working with men and boys. And there's a lot of wonderful work happening, Micaela, which are out there. And there's a lot of great interventions underway because growing healthy young men growing healthy men and boys is definitely part of the answer, and it's a huge part of prevention. We do focus, of course, on crisis, and I think we've heard Tanya, the Minister, Tanya Plibersek, say this a lot. We're spending $4 billion on family, domestic and sexual violence, more than any other government, and a great deal of that is focused on crisis, which is absolutely important, and I wouldn't suggest we take any of that away. But as you and I have discussed, and I know that this is important to you, is that we really need a strong focus on prevention now. And it has to involve changing culture, changing societal norms, dare I say it, tackling the patriarchy, and really growing young men who are robust enough in their own bodies, their own feelings, their own personalities, to remain respectful and confident in the company of women, and understanding those relationships and understanding consent, understanding equality. And it's such a huge undertaking to change that, because the patriarchy has been, as you know, has been all powerful for centuries, that sometimes I think, oh no, are we ever going to do it? But sometimes I think, you know what? Yeah,
Yep.
I think we are. And I was talking to a lovely young woman today. Her name is Claudia Young, and she wrote an amazing article for The Conversation recently. And she said, yes, you've got to remember, Jed, that the majority of young men and men generally, they do believe in equality, and they do want to be better men, and they do want to have good, healthy relationships. We just got to keep that trajectory. We've got to stop the trajectory before it becomes overwhelming. So I think we can do it. And I think there are some wonderful programs out there that are working on that right now. And I know you're very familiar with them, like the work that the Man Cave is doing, the Jesuit Social Services are doing, the Common Ground Project. We're investing a lot of money in growing, supporting adolescent boys at risk of using violence. We are doing some great work. And I think this is an area where we have to do some very serious evaluation. We have to understand what is working and what is not working, and making sure that we are directing resources to those things that work. And I believe we can do it. I really do.
That's very encouraging, and I think, as we've talked about before, very important to hear. I think it's important to hear from our leaders and our communities that the belief that this is possible. It's the belief that it is possible to change it. We're very good, and we have changed other very significant. We've addressed other really significant. Like, this is a public health issue. This is an epidemic that we are experiencing, and if we put our minds to it, it's quite possible to address. I agree with you. I firmly kind of believe that. It's just, and look, that's, I think, also the opportunity of this, what we know is coming in terms of the second action plan, the second half of this second national plan that we have. We've learnt a lot, and I think this refocusing on men and boys, and what we know too about children and young people in a different way, where we are learning a lot and we are getting sharper about what we need to be focusing on.
Agreed. Because it hasn't really had the attention it deserves, although there's a great deal of people out there doing really amazing work. I think in terms of that evaluation and as you say, sharpening the response, that's really where we have to focus now. And I'm excited. I think that there's some really terrific things that can be done. And, particularly I've seen some amazing programs in the First Nations space, for example. Dadi Manwaro is an organisation that's in my electorate, and oh my goodness, it is. They do amazing work with young boys and men, and so I'm feeling quite positive about that, and a growing understanding amongst young women about what is acceptable and what isn't, and the whole program around consent and respectful relationships. And I think that's the other side of this coin, is growing confident, robust young women who know poor behaviour when they see it.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it as well.
I think that's right. It's an incredibly important part of it. And I just want to then talk about another area of responsibility in your portfolio, because you've just mentioned about consent, about addressing sexual violence. Because while I absolutely agree with you about and have a whole that the work that is being done and the sense of hope, and I agree, I think a lot of our First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander led work is where a lot of the answers are. They're much better often at doing any, the whole of person, whole of community, integrating families in ways that we've siloed in quote unquote mainstream programs, ways that means that they're not as effective. But the area that we're not doing as well in Ged is sexual violence.
No.
And April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we know that rates of sexual violence have continued to increase in almost all states and territories, despite, as you've said, significant reform efforts in some jurisdictions. We know that the Australian government tasked the Australian Law Reform Commission with looking at justice responses to sexual violence. And one of the things that was very clear about that as well is that it's not just what we heard a lot about was that it's more than just a justice response because of the incredibly low rates of reporting. So that's another, I know, area of passion and focus of yours. So what have you been thinking about and again learning and focusing on in this role in terms of what we need to be doing in terms of addressing sexual violence in Australia?
Yeah, I think we start, there is, of course, an overlap with family domestic violence. Of course, there is. But there is also a large part of that Venn diagram, if you like, that is quite separate when it comes to sexual violence. Can be, of course, from an intimate partner. It isn't always, and it varies dramatically from, a dreadful sexual assault situation right through to the stories we've heard of being molested by driving instructors and sexual harassment at work. And I don't think there's a woman alive that doesn't have a story of some sort of sexual assault or insult. So it is all pervasive in my view. And I think the drivers are some of the drivers are different. I mean, we really don't know. There's some great work being done by La Trobe University at the moment looking at the drivers of sexual assault. And you're right about reporting. Reporting is low. We've got some best guesstimates really about how many young women, around 14% of Australians have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. That's around 2.8 million Australians. But as you said, there's probably a lot more. And one of the reasons of that is that it's not reported. There has been an increase in reporting, which is a good thing. And, we want women to report sexual violence. And part of that is women are simply not believed. They're told you are asking for it. There's a whole lot of societal mores around sexual assault. I know I worked in hospitality as a young woman and just got told, it's just part of the course. If someone shoves their hand up your skirt and gives you a good grope, that's just the industry you work in, love. Got to put up with it. Right through to the justice system being one of the major barriers, because we know, I think the statistic is 1 in 10 reports will actually even make it to court, let alone find someone guilty. The process is horrendous for a woman to go through the justice system, and I really congratulate the Attorney General and you. I know you did a lot of work on that report, Micaela, and coming through with that. And I think if we can break down some barriers in the justice system and make it easier for women, then we will see a good uptick, hopefully, in reporting and justice being served. But we're thinking a lot of the policy drivers around this are very similar. We're talking about consent, teaching young women about consent. We've got Chanel Contos doing her wonderful Teach Us Consent campaign. We've got the Consent Can't Wait campaign. We've got, as I said, La Trobe University looking at different programs around prevention of sexual assault. I am very interested in sporting clubs, really trying to get to grassroots communities where I think it is pervasive, and really doing some hard work with young men. There's a program at the moment working with coaches, teaching coaches to talk to their young charges about respect. There's a lot of work happening, as you would know, around the higher education code, around sexual assault on campus, implementing Respect at Work report. There's lots of things that are happening in the world of work around this, the online harm stuff that is happening in the communications portfolio with Minister Wells. The E-Safety Commission is doing a lot of work. There's a lot happening, but one of the things that I'm very keen on, and I know I've spoken about this because you're very big on this, Micaela, is trying to coordinate all of that cross-portfolio work and make it a really well-coordinated effort across all of government, I think it is so pervasive and such an issue that it calls for that. And that's something that I'm working on with Minister Plibersek's office to try to coordinate that work to make sure that we get some real change for women in this country.
I think that was such an important signal fairly early on when you took up this portfolio around bringing together all of the ministers in a round table to listen to sector and advocates about sexual violence and what needs to happen. Your commitment that you've demonstrated time and time again, and what you've just talked about then about bringing together these problems cannot be solved by any one portfolio, one minister alone. We need everybody joining up, and at every level, as you've said, people who influence in their local, people who've got influence and responsibilities in the way they relate to young men, boys, women in their communities, in their families, all the way through to all of the various portfolio holders coming together to think about the intersecting bits of work, because there is so much. One of the things I've learnt in this role, there is so much going on across government that doesn't necessarily intersect or align and that or have visibility. And that's right. That's part of what you've been doing in bringing some of that together. So I really want to acknowledge and thank you, and look forward to doing some more of that work with you, Minister.
Thank you. Yes. And it is a big coordination job, because we have the states and territories doing great work as well.
Yep.
In this space, there's the impact of alcohol and drugs, and, there's a lot that really needs to be tackled with respect to all of this. So I think as the Commissioner, it really is fantastic having you there, Micaela, and trying to keep us all in line and all heading in the right direction. We really do appreciate your efforts, and we couldn't do it without you, that's for sure.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I really realised when I started this role is that we're all just building on each other's work, and we all do the bit that we can from the role that we're in, and none of us could do this without each other.
No, and there's great people out there, fabulous people. We all know who they are, and I hope you're listening.
Yes, let's hope so. I've been ending this podcast, and I'm going to keep ending it with one question, which is really about the point that you've made a few times about hope and belief that we can change this. So this current national plan commits to ending violence against women and children, domestic, family and sexual violence in one generation. So I've taken a bit of artistic license, and given that a generation is about 30 years, and we're looking at 2050. So if we think about, if we've been successful within this national plan in laying the foundation so that we have pretty much solved the issue of domestic, family and sexual violence by 2050, what's the one thing that you think we need? Now, it's a completely unreasonable question, because there's more than one thing. But and I've been trying, everyone laughs when I ask that, what's the one thing that you think we need to do today that would help set us on the path to ending violence in a generation?
I think we need to start young. We need to start with young boys and young fathers, like first-time fathers. That's two things. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think that's a very reasonable answer. Yep. Keep going.
Starting young. That's what I would do.
Yeah. Well, I'm in furious agreement with you. Somebody asked me a question a bit like that the other day, and I said if I could pick one thing, it would be that. Let's refocus let's really sharpen up our focus on children, young people, boys, all of those points of intervention that we have. Let's start earlier than we are, and let's take that very seriously. So thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to an ongoing conversation with you about this, Ged, and supporting you in the work that you do.
Thanks, Micaela. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Voices Towards 2050, Ending Gender-Based Violence. Subscribe and join us for future conversations as we work together to achieve a future free from domestic, family and sexual violence. To learn more about the Commission, visit our website at dfsbc.gov.au. If you need support, contact 1-800-RESPECT or call 1-800-737-732. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you can call 13-YARN or 139276. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent the views of the Australian Government or the Commission.